All right, everyone. So my name is Helen. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of Galen Growth. Welcome, everyone, to this second event of the Records. As you know, for those of you who joined us the first time, it is a truly a community gathering around digital health. All of us being passionate about this space and wanting to learn more, and this is truly what these events are about. So for those of you who don't know who Galen Growth is, well, Galen Growth is the expert when it comes to digital health. I can humbly say that because we have a platform that is called Health Tech Alpha. You'll certainly hear about it. And Health Tech Alpha is really an amazing platform where we have over 7,500 health tech startups across the globe. And we monitor all of their activities, but of course, not only just in terms of funding, because that's kind of like the easy thing to do, but most importantly, in terms of the partnerships that they have built, their solution, the technology, as well as all the clinical research that they have, and all of the, I guess, most important things that needs to be laid on the table to really understand why is the startup better for me to partner with. Hence why we work with all of the big Fortune 500. Novartis is one of our old partners in this space, where we really help them to accelerate their innovation when it comes to digital health by looking at the full spectrum of startup that is out there and looking at which one would suit best for their ambition. So we have different innovation programs, different solutions to cater for all of our Fortune 500 partners that we have. And of course, the beauty of all of this is our reach that we have to the health tech startup community around the globe, which is for us the true DNA and treasure that we have at Galen Growth, is this possibility to always speak with the startup and understand the amazing work that they are doing. So I think that today, whilst I open my screen, I think that today, when I was preparing a bit for the panel, I was truly shocked to hear that actually, according to the National Cancer Institute, almost 40% of us will be diagnosed with cancer in our lifetime. So I was really, really shocked to see that this is the true pandemic, isn't it, right? Where a subject such as important as oncology is really touching a lot of us around us, and can definitely affect all of us as well. And so that creates a true burden, I would say, on the healthcare system across the globe, because if we are keeping the healthcare system as traditional as they are, we will have a lot of impact on the patient journey when it comes to the treatment of, the prevention, treatment, and of course diagnostic of cancer. So this is why I think the subject is very important today, because we can all explore together what are those new technology that would help us to make the prevention, the treatment, and the diagnostic of cancer even more efficient. Let's bring it to the next stage. Let's say let's make sure that if we are faced with this this crazy number of people that will be affected by cancer, let's make sure that we have solutions out there for them. So this subject today is really about oncology and discovering what's happening out there and what are the digital health startup what are they doing, and how can this really solve some of the pain points that we are facing right now. So you can download this report on the Galen Growth website, so galengrowth.com website. This is free to download, and if you have any question about some of these data that I will present, please reach out after this event, and we will make sure that we can talk about it. But I think I just want to pinpoint a few things, and then we will move to the panel. So just know that investors last year actually put 12% of all of their bets on startups that are focused on oncology. 12%. So that is actually enormous, because that was the only, or the number one, I should say, therapeutic focus area of investors looking at. So it's not actually mental health like we all thought because of COVID. It's actually oncology. So that's the positive news. A lot of money is being invested in a digital health oncology solution. Actually, if you look at all of this money, where it went, it's actually coming investors that are either based in the US with US startup, I should say, and APAC startup. So this is actually where we saw the most investment. And actually, I think it was double what we've seen in the previous year in these two markets. Now, when it comes to the Middle East, they actually kind of had a return back to normal because they had a lot of investment made in oncology the previous year. And unfortunately, we are seeing that Europe has actually decreased their investment made in oncology. So investors in Europe maybe are not seeing the same things as the US and APAC, let's say, are seeing this year. So what's interesting as well is when we are talking about oncology and digital health, there could be a lot of different technology focus, right? And I'm sure that everyone can understand this. This is why digital health is a little complicated, because there is a lot of clusters, a lot of the health tech category. So the money was actually mostly put in the medical diagnostic of oncology, so 63% of it. And the rest was actually put into the research side and the health management solution clusters of oncology. So that just to give you kind of a very high level understanding of where investor decided to put their money when it comes to investing in oncology. So medical diagnostics is really where they decided to invest. And really quickly, just to kind of like help us start this panel, what is the kind of the global space when it comes to oncology? So I think that it's interesting to see the numbers of startup that we have in oncology, but I think the most interesting data that we have to really start this panel is that half of these ventures actually sits here in Asia Pac. So we have more startups that are focus on oncology than the United States. So this is the beauty of being based here in APAC. It's a really dynamic space when it comes to oncology. And I think that this will really be the beauty of this panel today, that you will be able to see with our panelists. So without any further ado, please let me hand over to Hong Ling that will moderate this panel today. And if ever you have any question regarding the quick data set that I've just shared with you, or if ever you read the report, please do not hesitate to reach out either via our website or via LinkedIn. We are there to support and help. So thank you so much. Hong Ling, over to you.
Thank you so much, Helena, for the very nice introduction. Hi, everyone. I'm Hong Ling. I'm from Novartis Oncology Asia Pacific, and I'm the medical director for the cluster focusing on solid tumors. And I totally agree with Helena that cancer has been and is still the top health burden in most of our countries. Novartis Oncology focuses on research and development in top cancers such as breast cancer, lung cancers, as some of the key hematologic malignancies. Over the last 5 to 6 years, we have also put our early research efforts in Asian prevalent cancer types, such as liver cancer, gastric cancer, CRCs, and so forth. So I think today I'm really honored to come to be here and to join the panel here to learn more about digital oncology, which is pretty new to me, I must say. And thanks to my colleague, Christian, for inviting me to moderate the session today. So without further ado, let's start with a panel discussion, and hopefully we'll then leave about 15-20 minutes for Q&A at the end with all of you. So today we have 3 distinguished speakers and to share with us their journey and their innovations associated with oncology or digital oncology. We will first start with Dr. Dean Ho. And Dr. Dean Ho is the director of #1 Institute for Health in NUS. So Dean, could you unmute yourself and please share with us the setup of #1 Institute for Health. As I mentioned before, I'm actually a physician from old schools where we were taught not to just rely on machines or the reports from the examinations or technology, but believe in more of your eyes and what you see from your physical examinations when you treat and diagnose patients. So how would you describe the benefit of your innovations, such as Curate.ai, to a physician like me and to my patients, and any real-life examples to share? Dean?
Sure. Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be on this panel today. So just a quick intro. So I currently am director of N1, and N1 stands for N of one, right? So we personalize and individualize all of our trials to each patient that we recruit. And so our work is clinical stage and it's interventional. I also direct the Institute for Digital Medicine, also known as Wisdom, and also head of Department at Biomedical Engineering and part of the Department of Pharmacology. So when you kind of look at all of these different areas of expertise combined, what I'll say that the core focuses of what we do are two areas, right? Working closely with good friend Ed Chow and the QPOT platform, what we have are capabilities in designing optimized regimens, combination regimens that are either optimized for populations of patients, or they are truly personalized to each patient that is recruited into a trial. And then by harnessing Curate, we have to know how to dose these regimens, all right? Because I'll say this before, and I've said it again, it's even good drugs given together in combination at the wrong respective doses can yield no outcome, in fact. And the problem with that is this leads to this misperception that the drugs are not effective, right? And so giving good drugs, wrong dose, no efficacy. But in fact, what this shows us is if you take some of these regimens and you give the drugs at the right dose, you can actually reacquire efficacy, all right? And so I've talked about designing regimens and I've talked about optimizing doses, right? It actually is a complex parameter space problem, right? Because you have to know which drugs to give together at the right respective dose. At the same time, the right respective dose has a role in picking which drugs you give in the first place. All right, so you have to really reconcile which drugs to give together at what respective dose. And once you figure that out, you need to start giving these drugs at the right dose moving forward, right? And so I'll give an example. So when we look at different drug combinations, for example, the way we design them is quite different than how they're done traditionally. We don't rely on even mechanism of action on how we do the optimization, right? It really is an optimization problem, all right? And so the combinations that we come up with in the end don't rely on pre-existing data. They don't rely on mechanistic data. It's really about reconciling phenotype. How do we optimize efficacy and safety, right, through prospectively acquired data? So I'll give a very simple example. Not long ago, you mentioned CRC. We had a patient here in Singapore, stage 4 advanced cancer, colorectal cancer, and in one of the second-line therapy regimens was not responding at all, right? Totally not responding, which is very common. And so what you typically do is you move this patient to another line until they run out, right, of options. And so the way we do things a little bit differently are we were able to, through a approved protocol, allowed to study how the patient was responding at other doses, right? Not just giving them a max high fixed dose and seeing if they respond. We were allowed to try a bit of a lower dose, a bit of a middle dose, and a bit of a standard dose, but measuring their corresponding biomarkers at each dose. And what happened was after giving this patient the standard dose, no response, the biomarkers are climbing, et cetera, we actually dropped the dose by about 50%, right? And when that happened, the patient immediately started responding. Okay, so you're giving this patient standard dose, they're not responding, they're about to be moved on to something else, but because of our protocol, we actually allowed to drop the dose, and we had evidence that they could respond, and they in fact did respond. Imaging confirmed stable disease, et cetera. And so what's happening here is under standard trial designs, you have patients that are randomized to get one of the doses. Give this patient a low dose, give that other guy a middle dose, give the other guy a high dose. And when people don't respond to these randomized doses, we think, hey, they're not responsive, let's just move them on. Or end of treatment, they don't respond to this therapy. But you'll never have known if they could have responded to a different dose. And so what Curate does is it prospectively calibrates each user as they enter a trial. or as they undergo standard of care treatment. And our goal here is not to low dose every single patient that walks in. That's not our goal. Our goal is to allow this calibration process to capture more responders. Okay. And then after you capture more responders, it could be 10%, could be 20%, could be more, depending on the trial, but that's a lot of people. But after we capture responders, we eventually dynamically dose them because drug synergy is dose dependent, it's time dependent, and it's patient specific, right? And so our goal is to capture more responders and allow the treatment to evolve alongside the patient, because patients are certainly different from each other, but we are different from ourselves over time, right? So what we do at N1, at Wisdom, in our department is we harness AI and digital to better calibrate each user in a very scalable fashion and to rapidly design regimens that are dynamic and that can be tailored and evolve in time alongside the patient. And we do this without pre-existing data. We don't train algorithms. We do this using an AI-discovered optimization approach, and we prospectively acquire our data. The data that we need doesn't exist. It has to be prospectively acquired. And today we'll talk about how we do that in just a little bit. Thanks. I think you might be muted, Dr. Hongling. I think you might be muted.
Yes, sorry. Thank you. So, wow, I was saying that, Dean, you are describing something truly, to me, a personalized medicine, because you are looking at individual patients and individual doses for them, and individual, perhaps even combinations, right? And you may not
That's
apply
right.
to other patients, but this combination may work in this patient. So it's truly personalized medicine to me. And in the layman term, just to explain to me, who is really not AI savvy, what kind of protocol you are, since you're saying here, you are not using any data in your system, right? Mm-hmm. You are doing prospective data collection. How do you design the protocol without past experience? I know AI is something doing deep learnings, and they need big data to do deep learnings. But if you don't have any old data or previous data, how do you get AI to have this deep learning in order to give you these suggestions for the specific patients, just in a layman term?
That's a great question. You know, for us, it's not about how much data, right? It's how you acquire the data, especially for treatment, right? When you look at, for example, you get a patient's biopsy and you want to design a drug combination for that patient. Under traditional approaches, you look at mutations, right, to their genes. You look at molecular alterations and you say, hey, look, they've got this mutation, let's give them this drug. But when that happens, clinicians can try the drug, it works, it doesn't work, but we're completely missing this huge galaxy of additional opportunity, right, where you can take the drug, combine it with other drugs, and then optimize the combination design and the dose. But to do that, I don't need 10 million data points, right, to try to really find the best possible combos you can give for this patient. It's about understanding the different permutations of drugs and doses, et cetera, and using various strategies that we've derived previously with neural nets, which at this point, we don't even need the big data anymore. We want to understand how this tumor responds to drug 1, 7, and 9, 2, 6, and 12, et cetera, et cetera. It's an optimization problem.
Okay.
And at that point, I don't need a ton of data. I just need to run a few hundred experiments on this biopsy. And within 5 days, we will know not just one combo, but ranked from best all the way to worst, what are the regimens that clinicians can then pick from, right? And then for prospective dosing, I don't need 50,000 patients worth of dosing info on these drugs, because first of all, some of these combinations may not have been commonly given, or they're given at fixed dose. So when a patient walks in the door, we have protocols that allow us to try this dose, measure the response, another dose, measure the response, a third dose, measure the response. So we calibrate their quadratic, as we call quadratic profile, which was derived previously with neural nets. So using a small amount of data, calibrated very specifically, we know how to run this optimization approach. And patients 1 through 50 have no bearing on patient number 51. Patient 1 has no bearing on patient number 2, right? We use small amounts of prospectively acquired, carefully designed data acquisition to calibrate, whether it's a cell line, whether it's an animal, whether it's a human. That's how we run our optimization.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you so much. So then the follow-on question is that right now, Curate.ai seems looking at more of optimization for cancer patient treatment outcome. But as we know that as a clinician, the best cancer control strategy is actually to prevent or to detect early. So in this front, is there any AI technology or any approaches, innovations that N1 or your institute or any other institutes are now doing to explore and to improve the strategy for prevention or cancer early detection?
Yeah, this is something I'll comment briefly on. I think it would be perfect for Huron to jump in on this one as well from a clinical perspective, in that I'll comment a bit more on the detection aspect, right? I think that there are a lot of very promising technologies out there to monitor patients either early or during the course of treatment. An area that we're hoping to do a lot more of is longitudinal measurement of patients, right? Because what typically happens is you kind of give a patient a therapeutic, and if you want to start measuring how they're responding, or you want to use the same platforms for early detection or similar platforms, we don't. I think it'd be nice to get a lot more longitudinal data for each patient as they undergo, whether it's screening or subsequent therapy, while being exposed to varying levels of drug exposure. And there's a lot of cool technologies that are out there right now, based in Singapore, international partners, so on and so forth. And the AI comes in different ways, right? The data that we acquire with these platforms could subsequently be used for other big data or small data AI approaches. But the way these diagnostics are even developed have used a lot of AI, right? Where if you look at what therapeutics may be optimal to be suggested based upon certain molecular alterations, we can take that information built from big data, right? We don't need big data, but we still partner with big data. And these therapies become candidates that we can subsequently apply to our optimization studies for eventual clinical optimization as well. And I think, between Huron and Martin, during the course of trial, during the course of treatment, I think there's a lot of insights they can offer on that.
Exactly. Thank you so much, Dean. So perhaps we can turn to Martin. So Martin, please share with us. I know that you have done some trials with oncology diagnostics in your career and in your current setup. And just for the audience, Martin Lim is the founder and the CEO of Onward Health. So Martin, would you like to introduce a bit more about yourself and about your projects in oncology diagnostics to improve early detection?
Yeah, sure. So thank you, Dr. Hongling, and thank you for having me on this panel. So it's a pleasure to be a part of it. So I'll talk briefly about Onward Health Research, and then I'll sort of jump into how it sort of relates to today's topic. But so Onward Health Research, we're about a 2-year-old company now based in Singapore, and we're developing a clinical research platform, a web-based clinical research platform that is used as a tool to conduct decentralized clinical trials, right? And so that's been a big topic these days with COVID and oncology trials and all types of trials around the world having to kind of move away from hospital settings, especially when pressure on hospitals is increasing. And so you may have heard that term used a lot. A lot of variations of that term: decentralized trials, virtual trials. And so for us, that's really a spectrum of how clinical trials can be run, right? So on one end of the spectrum is a full virtual trial, where everything takes place digitally, from pre-screening, responding to a Facebook ad, signing up online, and then having your medication or medical device be delivered to your home, and then you fill out everything on a phone or other device, inputting the data. In the middle, there's a hybrid trial. The trials can be done sort of halfway. The visits that can be done at home will be done at home, facilitated with technology such as ours. And then those that require a physician, a visit to a clinic, maybe some of these more complex infusions for oncology therapeutics, would be done in an academic center or a hospital. And then, the traditional clinical trials would be fully done at a hospital, as we know. So we're working to move that experience, particularly for the patient, but also for the clinicians, to make it as easy as possible to have participation in clinical research through technology, right? And then, as Dean mentioned, a lot of these protocols, you end up having a small population, and so you're going to need to have a broader reach to find those patients that meet some of those protocol requirements. And so that's where really technology can come into play. So Onward Health Research, we do a combination. We do multi-specialty clinical research. Some of the things that we do in oncology and that we're starting to see are in line with what Helen mentioned in her report. So 66% of the funding, is for diagnostics. So we're starting to see some of those types of companies approach us, and they really want for us to help them, again, back to accessibility of clinical research, right, to be able to conduct these trials as virtually as possible. So those are the things that we're starting to see, and those are the pieces that we're working to develop when we customize our platform for each of these protocols. Yeah, so I mean, those for now. I'll kind of pause it there and
thank you,
hand
Matt.
it back to you. Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing. I think under the current COVID situations, all the company, including Novartis, is trying to look at the innovative approach in doing our research in each and every countries where COVID is a pandemic. So decentralizing clinical trials certainly is a very relevant concept that we have explored internally. And I think there are also many ethics considerations to consider, right, in terms of informed consent, in terms of the compliance and the monitoring. So many questions still yet to be answered, but I'm glad that your company is now forefront in this area. And then I think we will have a lot of opportunity to collaborate. So now can we have Dr. Huren to share with us. Dr. Huren is actually an oncologist who worked in National Cancer Center before, and he's now the full-time clinician innovator, who is a co-founder and a CEO of the Oncology-focused. And also, my first question, Huren, to you is, as a clinician, full-time oncologist working in NCC, what has made you change, or what motivated you to move on to be a full-time clinician innovator to really going to the digital world?
Hi, Dr. Hongling. Thanks for allowing me to participate in this session. So, hearing Dean's and Martin's introductions, there was something that really underlies why I kind of chose my path as well. One of the key things to enable the tremendous work that someone like Dean is doing, where he's going into working with at the level of an individual patient and the amount of data that needs to be managed, and subsequently to help put that data together and piece together prospectively how we approach that patient, to the point where working in terms of the space of decentralized clinical trials, we are trying to identify patients based on certain data points of clinical factors who may be candidates for a trial and to put them together into a trial. It's fundamentally data that we are all talking about. Now, from my experience as a clinician, not just in the NCCS, but even before that, while I was serving my national service in the Singapore Armed Forces as a medical officer, something that was really, really obvious to me was the fact that data in healthcare systems was so siloed, right? Everything was stuck in particular places. But most importantly, the biggest and most critical information that we can get about patients, which are generally within the healthcare systems, that's where it's stuck. And what's even more tricky is the fact that even within the healthcare system, it can be stuck in multiple places. Now, unless we can let that stream flow, we can never really realize the full value of what all these innovations can actually happen. And when I thought about it from the perspective of an oncologist, I had two experiences that really impacted me. The first was as a clinician undergoing training in oncology, where I would see patients in my routine clinic. And whenever we see a patient, we always want to map for them the entire landscape of treatment options. Now, the truth is in oncology, your treatment options are not just standard therapies, but should also constitute a clear evaluation of the viable clinical trial options that a patient has, first and foremost within your institute, and beyond that, potentially within the rest of the country or even beyond, if the patient can actually access those clinical trial options. Now, if I'm managing one trial at my site, or if I'm very, very familiar with a handful of trials, I can keep that in my mind and continuously be able to identify if a patient in front of me matches those trials. But what if I'm conducting 70 trials that are a mixture of early phase clinical trials that are tumor agnostic and also very tumor specific trials? There's no way that an individual oncologist can keep all of that information in mind in terms of all the eligibility requirements for a specific trial and continuously map that to the patient in front of him. That itself, you have a problem with how do you reconcile data about clinical trials with the patient in front of you. That was
I know that many pharma company paste stickers on your computers, right, to remind them.
Yeah, so we've got tons of stickers and tons of A4 papers with eligibility requirements of every trial that you can think of, plastered all over the wall. And at the end of the day, no one can actually look at it on time, unless you kind of, it triggers in your mind, right? So that's problem number one. Now, the problem number two, which was a very painful problem for me, which was while I was doing my traineeship, I had a wonderful opportunity to work with genomic sequencing of a group of cancers called triple negative breast cancers, right? And I had this opportunity where we could study the population of approximately 100 to 30 or 150 TNBCs, which was sequenced, and then to kind of look at that population and say, what are the genomic alteration of features that we could pick up that could potentially offer some treatments or clinical trial angles for this patient population. Now, the problem with that study was that we actually didn't have a good starting point in terms of who these 130 patients were, what were all their clinical genomic points, data points that were already pre-existing before we could select and shape that patient population to do the genomic sequencing. All we had in front of us was the fact that we've collated a large database of TNBCs within Southeast Asia. We should just sequence them. And at the end of the day, because we didn't have the right data sets, the output from that study resulted in genomic sequencing of very early stage TNBCs, for which we actually didn't hit even a median overall survival for them. They were all doing really well. And so the genomic results didn't actually come back to any clinical significance. But it goes back to the fact that the starting problem was the fact that we didn't have the right data sets in place to actually be able to analyze the nature of our patient population before we can make the right clinical decisions or research decisions. So when I started OncoShot, my biggest headache was, what could I do to break some of these data barriers or silos in a way that is safe, secure, and can facilitate the flow of data across not just within a public sector partner, but across the public-private continuum, so that we can realize the maximum value with data exchange. And that's how my journey of OncoShot started.
Excellent, excellent. So I know that our Singapore Medical Director, Dr. Chris Lim, is working with you to try to leverage on OncoShot to boost our recruitment in some of the oncology studies in Singapore. So I'm sure you're also working with many other stakeholders and also the entire healthcare ecosystem to improve the system and improve the collaborations. So through this journey, what is the key opportunities and challenges you have seen so far with having this good match of patients to the right trials in a timely manner?
So let me just answer that with the challenges first. and then we can go to the opportunities. I think just going to the phrasing that you use, which is really important. How can we do this in a timely manner? Now, this is very accurate in the sense that we need data, but more importantly, we need data that is relevant and data that is timely, right? Because of the nature of oncology patients, where mortality rates can be high, it is not sufficient for us to just get old retrospective data and to make tremendous extrapolations about the patient population, and so we can start a trial based on the fact that we have done previous trials in Institute ABC for a patient population. Today, we have the capability and technologies to be able to analyze patients if we only have their data. So the challenge for a company like OncoShot working within the public-private continuum is actually in structuring the model or the incentivization mechanism to be able to go to our data partners and most importantly, our public institutions, which are generally a zero risk sort of setting, and to say, look, we can structure a model that is safe, secure, and at the end of the day provides you with some level of cost recovery so that you can participate within this framework. If we can then structure that, then it becomes a question of what is the minimum safe amount of data that we can take out in an anonymized or de-identified manner that makes sense to you, but at the same time is tremendously valuable for the industry stakeholders for them to make their decisions, whether it is a trial decision or a commercial decision, on how they want to actually pursue their decisions from that. So from my perspective, it's about firstly recognizing the fact that we have the appropriate technologies, but from a more strategic perspective, how do we orchestrate that model to work for our big data partners, our institutes, and our industry partners at the same time? And so that's been a learning process, but I think we have been taking good steps and moving ahead one step at a time. And I think it's this space for us, as I think about it, it's not been executed at scale before, largely because historical way of managing this would be to deploy a solution within a academic center to say that, look, I'll deploy a database solution for free. Put in your data and I'll find something out of this data that I can return back to you, right? Now, this results in a loss of autonomy and governance for the institutes in terms of how their data is used. And more importantly, a lot of the data that tends to be analyzed tends to be transactional. I take the data once, and maybe the next time I take that data would be, say, 1 month later or 10 months later or 1 year later, depending on the contract that you had. For me, it's about if we can build that model, there could be a possibility of continuous data sharing or at least near real-time data sharing, where an institute notes that it still has its autonomy, it still has its governance framework to be able to share data at intervals, and it knows what's being done with its data. And that's where I think in Singapore, I'm really hoping that this is shaping out, in a manner that will benefit a lot of our institutional and academic partners at the same time over the coming months.
Thank you so much. And I believe that you as a clinician will still have a better access to the data rather than us in the pharma industry. So we totally...
I'm not within the institution now, so I'm still... So in fact, now my role is more of as a third party, platform where we can facilitate that exchange. So it's actually quite important for me not to be on either side of that equation as well.
Excellent. So maybe now we turn to, thank you so much, Huren. Martin, you mentioned that you have done, number of trials in the Southeast Asia region. So following on to the same discussion we had with Huren, what do you see as the biggest challenge you've seen in the region in running clinical trials, especially now we are going into this decentralized clinical research model?
Yeah, so sure. And just to clarify, so a lot of my experience for running trials was previously during my life in the US, where I spent a lot of my time. I moved back to Singapore specifically to launch Onward Health Research about 2 years ago now. And since then, we've built up a network. We built up the technology platform as well. It was built actually during COVID. And then now we're about to embark on our first set of projects on the second half of this year. And I think, in terms of the timing, we were a bit fortunate, in terms of clinical research technology. Some of the technologies are 10, 20 years old. And we see some of these companies that have been there for a number of years repositioning their products or making significant investments and updates to make them usable for decentralized trials. So for us, we take a bit of a different approach than what Huren's talking about, and we go in and we create platforms to collect data, both for phase 1, 2, 3, and 4 clinical trials, but also for longitudinal studies. So as Dean mentioned, the need for collecting ongoing data. One of the things that we're seeing as an opportunity, for example, is to go in and structure just ongoing collection of data, especially now with the number of devices that people have, whether it's in their smartphones or their smartwatches and things like that. So those are some of the things that we have our eyes set upon. As we're working so we're based in Singapore, and we are operating now in Singapore, and we have partners in Indonesia where we're planning to launch our first two trials. And some of the challenges that we're seeing there really have to do with technology adoption and sort of educating, in general, also just the public awareness of what clinical research is, some aversion to participate, and addressing some of those challenges. So we've seen places where some examples of governments that have done a good job actually of creating campaigns that can promote awareness for participation in clinical research. I think Malaysia, as one example, has done a great job. They have a campaign called I Am Aware that has increased awareness of clinical research and encouraged participation. So that's certainly one of the challenges. The other is just regulatory timelines, the time it takes to get clinical trials up and running for organizations, regulatory bodies such as the HSA to review the protocols, make sure that they're okay to run in the particular country, getting either the devices or the therapeutics approved for experimental use in those countries is another big challenge that we're running into. But we're seeing countries recognize that when when we're looking to start clinical trials, they're competing on a country level. It's not just a hospital or a particular doctor, right? And so entire countries are taking strides to shorten those timelines. So those are a couple of examples that we're seeing them.
Thank you so much, Martin. To be fair, I think on the regulatory approval timeline, HSA is one of the authority that's doing pretty good job in terms of the timeline. But I do agree with you that we have quite a number of authorities in the region that takes a bit too long for the approvals. And there's a lot of to and fro of communications before the trial can be approved. So very good observations. So I think we need to move into the Q&A, but in the last word, maybe we start with Dean. What do you think that will be the most exciting thing this year? And also looking into the future, what will be the future projects that N1 Institute for Health will be looking into for digital oncology?
It's a great question. I think by and large, if you look at our core focus, it's to not only reconcile getting more data, but it's, again, how that data is acquired. We have to, when we talk about AI, there's a lot of things, let's get data, let's train algorithms, and then the real question is, what is our ultimate aim for that data, right? Is the data to pick treatments for patients? Is the data to hopefully improve treatment outcomes? Or is our goal to find the best possible treatment you can offer that patient at any given time? Because that will dramatically change the way that we acquire the data, right? We always get questions, hey, when we're designing drug combos for COVID, when we are designing drug combos for a breast cancer patient, when we are dosing a colorectal cancer patient, where do we get all this data? And the real answer is we don't have it. There is no other place we get it. We have to acquire it in a certain way, right? Drug development as we know it personalized medicine as we know it, a lot of that is big data driven. And what does the big data tell us? It tells us that this person has this mutation, so give them this drug and see what happens, right? So you're going to find them the best drug out of maybe a list of 50 that you can give them. Our goal is to take probable or potential therapeutics, interrogate 1 trillion possible options for these patients, but consolidate it into a few hundred experiments to find them from a global optimization perspective. What is the best possible combo we can give them? All the way down to what is the worst possible combo we can give them, because we get all of those answers depending on how strategic we are in acquiring that data. Right. So I think that right now the AI digital oncology field has some advancing to do, because we have to really decide what are our expectations for that data. And finally, I'll say that I think we're relying a lot on discovery, right? We're relying a lot on saying, hey, I've got this really cool drug compound, and let's just shove it through the development pathway using traditional strategies, and let's cross our fingers. Let's hope that it works, right? I think we're missing this entire opportunity to take that asset, because coming all the way back to the beginning, if you take a promising drug and you don't use it correctly, the statistics are working against it, right? Oncology failure rates are super high. So if we don't use this drug correctly, it's going to fail. And if it fails, we never think about this drug again. But the reality is, if we acquire the right data with this drug, we put it, right permutations with other candidate therapies, we are completely missing an entire landscape of possibilities for how to best use candidate therapies, and then after that, how to best administer these therapies. We're relying purely on, let's use AI and design a cool compound. And if it's cool and AI was behind it, it's got to work. But that's not true at all, right? We have to take compounds and use them more effectively. And to do that, we have to acquire data in the right way. So for the next year, 2 years, 3 years, N1, Wisdom, our institutes, as well as the companies that we're partnered with or involved with, we are going to leverage a different way of how we optimize the use of therapies. And this opens doors to optimizing population-wide drug development, optimizing drug combos for each patient, how we dose the combos for each patient, and importantly, going back to what Huron mentioned, how we better predict if patients are going to respond to therapies to recruit more efficiently for trials. This whole process involves not only technology, it involves the clinical community, it involves regulators who we do engage with constantly, it involves behavioral scientists. We have a whole team at Wisdom that works with clinicians, doctors, nurses, pharmacists to better understand how we make their lives easier by integrating our tech into their workflows. We work with healthcare economists. And in fact, our very first hire into Wisdom came from the insurance industry, right? And so this process of how we better acquire data, how we better develop drugs, how we better treat patients involves this entire community of stakeholders. And over the next year, we're going to involve all of them, as we always have, to ensure that we can properly build these solutions into existing clinical workflows.
Excellent. So I'm impressed that you're working with the entire ecosystem for healthcare, and not just talking about patient journey, but you're also looking at physicians or nurses, treatment or nurses' life journey in the hospital to see how you can help them. That's impressive.
It absolutely takes that, because, and if we don't think about the payer, if we don't think about the regulator, if we don't think about the nurse, the pharmacist, the great technologies will not make it. It takes this, and we engage them early. So we know early how to properly integrate into these workflows.
Very good advice. I think even to pharma, we have to think about that as well, besides patient journey. So now what about Huron? What do you think about the most exciting things coming up for OncoShot or for the entire digital oncology?
I think there's so many things going on in digital oncology that maybe I'll just focus on what we can do. And I think one of the most exciting things for us is that we've finally gotten a few of our stakeholders and engagements in shape, where OncoShot is working with approximately 7 different hospitals within Singapore, India, and Victoria, Australia, as our partners within our very specific niche area, which is oncology, clinical trials, and data science. So that's the niche that we're working with. And aside from these stakeholders that we have already engaged and we're starting to get data in, we're also really excited to be partnering the leading oncology pharma such as yourselves and other companies which are CROs and biotechs who are leveraging on OncoShot not as a data platform, but as a product platform that comes in, that sits uniquely to satisfy a certain demand for data or information, but nevertheless has that data incorporated within an existing clinical trials process. So one of that use cases that we have launched recently in beta has been our clinical trials feasibility solution, where industry stakeholders can start to leverage of the data insights to understand patient populations. And as much as Dean wouldn't like it, broad populations with clinical trials that are, blunderbuss everywhere, that's what the industry does today. And, we work from that angle. And hopefully at some point in time, I really imagine that I would meet Dean right in the middle as well, where the systems like this can really start talking to each other and, effecting the change that's required. But going back to what we do, we have productized how that data sits in our platform within a clinical trial feasibility solution. And separately, we are looking to actually run that same data within specific clinical trial programs where we can help to accelerate the time to first patient screen and enrolled. Because OncoShot at its core is a matching AI that helps to identify patient clinical genomic qualities and map them to the eligibility requirements of a specific trial. So that's how we've kind of shaped our solutions. And we now have two sides of the public-private continuum who are participating in our solution. And I think there was a question separately about how does the model work, but maybe, if later on we do have the time, we can go into that, but I'll stop at that. And I think that's going to keep us really busy for the next year ahead.
Thank you, Huran. So Martin, maybe in a very brief summary, what's your expectation with Onward Health?
Yeah, so at Onward, what we're working on in the short term, one of the things is focusing on patient and researcher engagement with our platform. So we have just been actually awarded a grant and are working together with Singapore Biodesign and A-Star on this particular project to look at how to make this go from data collection technology to something really engaging, offering something beyond what the participants are expecting, and having them not only just compliant with participation but excited about it. So that's really one of the things that we're focused on for the next 6 months or so. Beyond that, we're focused on successfully deploying our first projects here in Asia, and then so being in Indonesia and in Singapore, and then growing beyond that. We're looking at other areas within ASEAN in particular, so Thailand, Vietnam, Philippines, and so on.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Now let's turn to the chat and look at the questions that we have from the audience. So we have questions from Prasanna from India. The question is to Dean. Very interesting example on personalized dosing. Just wanted to know whether the genetics of the patient was the reason for the response, or it was some other parameters which could have a role in the achieved response. And also, how do you think this personalized approach will be adopted by the authority in trial design in future?
It's a great question. So first off, genetics could play a role, but again, we have to think, we don't want to ignore genetics, but that's one factor, right? Because you can pick drugs off the genetics, but you still have an opportunity to optimize how you use that, right? And so what we do is we use phenotype. And just to quickly address another question, the phenotypes that we use are decided with the clinician, right? This goes into this whole theme of engaging the community. We ask the clinicians, what type of phenotypic changes we need to see in the patient to guide how we deploy these therapies, right? So it is this bridge of genetics to help us pick the drugs, but then we use optimization paired with phenotype to actually deploy the drugs, right? And on phenotype, it could be blood-based biomarkers. It could be digital biomarkers. And even that part too, we have to engage with others in the community, right? So you have clinical, you have regulatory, all the way to the backers, right? And the digital health funds and innovators, like my good friend Gavin Teo, right? Who knows the space well. This entire spectrum of bridging genotype with phenotype, with deployment, with regulation, they're all interconnected. And I think right now, maybe it's a bit more segmented, right? You get their genetic or their molecular alteration, pick a drug, let's move on. But there's so much more that has to happen in order to see the bigger impact.
Thank you, Dean. So the next question is for Huren from Contact. How best can we collaborate to break the silo between healthcare system and data? Would be great to hear some success stories.
Yeah, so I think first and foremost, it has to be a win-win situation that can be affected, especially for where the silos are, which is the large healthcare providers. And we also have to bear in mind that they are typically almost near zero risk kind of institutes. They might want to participate in innovation, but how can they also participate with limited risk? And especially when it comes to data sharing, now you've got to make all those pieces fit. Risk-free kind of mechanism, safeguarding patient data and privacy, and at the same time providing a 10x value back to these organizations, right? So I think that has to be the mental model in which someone wants to work in to kind of make such silos break in the first place. If you can't put those pieces together, it's going to be really hard to break those silos. What are the models that have worked? I think in the US, there have been some organizations that have managed to do that. A good example of that could have been Flatiron. But in a way, if you think about it, it's a bit sneaky as well, because you purchase an EMR and you get that access to that EMR, right? We need a model that is more inclusive. How can anyone who doesn't have to be bought over by a company still decide that I can actively participate in data sharing? And I think that data sharing framework, I have actually not seen an open or near open data sharing framework in that manner being adopted at scale. And I think it's going to take us some time to get there, a lot of experimentation. But I think there are some steps that are being taken by different pockets of organizations around the world. And hopefully we'll get there as a community of researchers and industry partners who can actually see that exchange happening. But yeah, I think that there's some time that needs to be spent in working towards that.
Thank you, Huren. So a question to Martin from Fernandez. Since you mentioned data is collected from the smartphones for virtual or decentralized clinical trials, what kind of clinical data do you capture from smartphone? And I think another related question from Jacqueline is PDPA and data ownership is not easy to navigate around. Do you have any tips, suggestion to make it easier?
Okay, so I'll start with the first one. So the type of data that we are collecting are what you would typically see in a clinical trial, right? So it starts with some demographic information about the patient, vital signs, and
so are you
screening.
basically copy the whole case report form into the smartphone, or is
Correct. Correct. So there's two parts to our platform. One is for the researcher to use, and that is the entire CRF. We make it an eCRF. And then the second part is for the participant to use, and that's a subset of it. So if we can move some of that protocol over to the participant for them to enter, that's what's entered in the smartphone. So typically it's pain response scores, symptoms, things like that. So it's a limited set of the whole set of data. So that's the first part. The second part, the PDPA question, That's a tricky question, right? I mean, those are some of the things that we're talking to our attorneys about to see if we can push what we can do once we amass the data. There's a lot of information that we can now have, right? And then start to work with the likes of Hurin and Dean with that type of data set. So for the time being, I'll just say we've kept it pretty conservative, and we do keep it pretty clear in our terms and conditions of what we will intend to do with it. Anything that we do currently would be anonymized.
Anonymized, okay.
Yeah, analysis, correct.
Thank you so much. I think, sorry, our time is up, but I saw quite a number of questions still on. Christian, are we able to postpone, delay 5 minutes so that we can get 2 more questions answered?
So Hongling, I will leave it to the panelists and the audience. So okay. I think if everyone who wants to stay on is okay, please go ahead.
2 more questions. So 1 question for Dean. Thank you, Christian. And is Curate.ai deployed commercially? This is also my question. So you have been talking about research. So is it deployed now commercially, or are you planning to do so? Any thoughts to share around regulatory approvals as SAMD for use as a CDSS?
It's a great question. So I think a different version of it is headed in that direction. It's kind of administered by a separate entity. We have spoken to regulators. In fact, I serve on a WHO working group specifically dealing with the regulation of AI for health as it relates to software as medical device, CDSS, and beyond. So it's headed in that direction. We've collaborated with pharma partners, which was quite interesting. We found better doses that have, again, resulted in more responders to treatment in collaboration with pharma partners with that. And another part, I think there was another really important question is, can we prioritize our solutions incorporating information like affordability, availability of therapies, and so on and so forth? And the answer is yes, right? When we prioritize combination regimens for patients, for example, we prioritize. It's a database where we could, after we run the optimization, if a clinician says, I don't have this drug, right? So can you find me the next highest ranking combination for this patient without this drug? My patient has a comorbidity, cannot take this other drug. Can we reprioritize? And you can certainly also rank based on cost as well. And we've started doing this for things like infectious diseases as well as oncology. And one final thing I'll say is when we've looked at dosing, we have started running studies on cost savings to the patient, because if we find better doses where they're not being readmitted or warded because of complications, we've already seen cases where we're saving a patient thousands of dollars a month and getting better outcomes. And that's just to the patient. There could be savings to the system as well, because patients don't need to be rewarded as well, right? And so certainly this is why we work with the healthcare economists. This is why we work with the payer side, so that we've already started this for all of our studies. And so commercial, it's headed in that direction. It's a different version. It's being done by a different team that we have set up. But in terms of how to economically deploy and scale, that's also being taken into account as well. It's a great question.
Thank you so much. I think now it's 5:04. Let's first of all, thank you so much for very experienced and knowledgeable and also very dynamic panel today. And really myself has learned a lot, and I really look forward to our future collaborations on healthcare and patient care. And also thanks for the participants. We still have 89 participants on the call after 5 minutes, so that's great. And I noticed we had more than 150 at one time. So just announcement for the next session, as according to Christian, we are planning another 3rd edition for hopefully face-to-face on the 23rd of September on remote patient monitoring. So it'll be another very interesting topic. So thank you so much, and Dean, and thank you, Hurin, thank you, Martin, for your time, and thanks for Christian for organizing it. See you, and thank you, Helena. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.